Hi everybody, back again. This lecture here is going to be about signs, okay? And this is an important sociological concept. I told you we'd be talking about a whole bunch of stuff, right? And I'm going to have these throughout the semester. But this one's very important because this lecture here that I talk about, the things I talk about, are going to lead directly into the discussion board post that I'm going to ask you guys to do following this video. So please pay attention. Please watch it all the way through. I'm going to work through some examples. I'm going to help you understand what it is I'm going to ask you to do with the discussion board post. So please watch it all the way through. Please pay attention. Take notes if you can. You can always come back and rewatch this as many times as you need, but it's very, very important. To begin with, we're talking about signs, right? Signs and symbols are two words I'm going to use interchangeably. So if you hear me say either one, that's what they both mean more or less the same thing. The question I'm going to ask you guys is this. Think about it this way. What is a sign? Now, I'm sure it's a word you probably encounter every day of your life, right? You've probably heard it a million times in your life. You could probably define it or explain it to somebody. But what does a sign mean? What is a sign from a sociological perspective? Well, the answer is the sign is something that stands for something else. Now, I mean, it's really that simple, right? You think to yourself, wow, I would have thought it'd be much more complicated than that, but I guess it's not. No, it really isn't. A sign is something that stands for something else. It's something that stands in for a representation of something that can't be present at that particular time. For example, a very obvious example, if I said to yourself, or if I said to you, and I guess I am, I've said to you, think of a sign. What sign comes to mind first? Guarantee, probably a stop sign, right? First thing that pops in your head, because that's the first thing that most people think of whenever I say, when you ask somebody, think of a sign. So stop sign, well, what is a stop sign, right? A stop sign is a red sign, that's a red 8-sided octagon, right? With white lettering that says stop, and it's usually out in public somewhere, right? Out in a public area. But what does it mean? Well, a stop sign is a direction, right? It is telling you, it's instructing you, in some cases you can argue, it's commanding you to do something, right? To perform a certain act. So in this case, a stop sign stands for a certain instruction, a certain communication, right? Or at least that's one way that you can interpret it. That's a very obvious way to interpret it. But the bottom line is this. This is very important for the discussion board. A sign is particularly composed of two parts, right? Two important parts. There's a signifier and what's being signified, okay? In this case, the signifier is the stop sign, the physical representation of the stop sign, and what's being signified is the idea, right? Or the concept, the direction, the instruction of stop your car, stop what you're doing, right? That's what's being signified. So again, signifier, the physical object, signified, right, which is the idea, the value, the belief, etc., whatever abstract idea that you want to think of that's being signified or being told or being talked about or being represented by this. And I'll give you an example here using the stop sign, right? So you have this physical representation of stop sign, and then you have this idea of what it stands for is to stop. It's a command or instruction, but it also stands for something more than that. Think of it this way. If you encounter a stop sign, say you're driving down the street, which you probably did today 10 times already, and you never really thought about it, you just stop because you take it for granted, you don't recognize it, you don't even see it anymore, you just do it because you've encountered it so often. But nonetheless, if you fail to stop at that stop sign, what might happen? Well, a number of different things might happen. Maybe you hit somebody, maybe there's somebody crossing the street and you hit them, and that's why that stop sign's there. Maybe you run into another car, right, because there was another car that was going when you were supposed to be stopping. Maybe a police officer's nearby and he sees you run a stop sign and he gives you a ticket, right? The point is this. In every case, there is a punishment, a repercussion that occurs because you failed to acknowledge that command, which means that there's a deeper meaning, a deeper level to the idea of a stop sign than just the superficial idea of instruction or a command. For example, it might mean, a stop sign might stand for safety, because if you don't stop, you could hurt someone or you could hurt yourself, right? Or it might stand for money, right? The money it's going to cost you to get your car repaired. The money it's going to cost you that when your insurance rates go up. The money it's going to cost you to repair somebody else's car because you failed to stop at that stop sign and you T-boned somebody, right? Or maybe your hospital bills you have to pay for yourself or somebody else. So it may be money in that way. It also stands for authority. Because if you fail to stop at a stop sign and a police officer sees you, he can pull you over and give you a ticket. And that's going to be a hefty fine of some type, depending upon where it's at and the conditions by which you ran the stop sign. But the point is, you can't have a police officer in every corner, but you can put a stop sign in every corner, and a stop sign has the same authority as if that police officer is standing there, right? Now, we may not always abide by that because sometimes we figure, pull up, you look around, you're like, there ain't nowhere around, right? I ain't stopping. I'm just going to slow down and kind of coast through it a little bit because you know from experience that maybe you can get away with it there. But nonetheless, you still recognize that you have to be sneaky and you have to try to get through it without getting caught, because if you do, you're going to there's repercussions and you're going to have to pay for it somehow. But that's what's important, right? So it's the signifier is still the physical object, but what's being signified can change. It can be a direction or instruction, but it can also stand for money. It can also stand for safety. It can also stand for authority. It can stand for a lot of different things. And you might even be able to think of some other things beyond that, right? But that's the essence of what I'm going to ask you guys to do on this next discussion board, is to take signs that you encounter in everyday life. And they can be lots and lots and lots of different things, right? Just about everything you see on an everyday level is signifying something to you. And it's telling you, it's giving you an idea of how it is that you're supposed to act in a social setting. For example, right, I'm going to take the classroom that I'm in right now, okay? I didn't want to walk around holding this. I don't want to give anybody motion sickness. But if you look around, again, same classroom I was in, okay? So if you look at it, you look and say, well, what are some signs that are present in this classroom that are communicating or instructing me? Well, one might be the arrangement of the seats. As you can see, they're all facing forward towards me. Well, if you were a student walking in this classroom, that tells you something about which way to face, doesn't it? You're not going to take your seat and turn it around, because that would be weird, right? So again, it's instructing you something. It's telling you something about what kind of behavior you're supposed to exhibit in this case. And the arrangement of the chairs signifies that the front of the classroom is over here because all the chairs are facing them, okay? Now again, the signifier would be the chairs and the arrangement of the chairs. What's being signified is the idea of the direction, okay? So let's take something else. How about, for example, the clock that's on the wall behind me? Okay, so a clock, you might say, well, it's just a clock, right? I see a clock all the time. Well, every room I enter into has a clock. Maybe you have a clock on your wrist, right? A watch. But either way, you look at that and you say, well, what does a clock signify, okay? The signifier, again, is the clock, the actual physical object. What's being signified, however, is different. In this case, you would look at it and say, well, it signifies time, right? It's a measurement of hours, seconds, minutes, and to a large extent, days, right? But it's so much more than that, right? So the signifier of the physical representation of the clock, so not only does it stand for time and the breakdown of time, but it stands for other things too. Think about it this way. We have a very, very popular saying in the United States that represents time. Time is what, okay? There's a saying that goes along with that. I'm betting you can finish that sentence. Time is what? Well, time is money, right? Time is money. Well, what do we mean by that? Well, think about it. When you have a job, you probably get paid by the hour. If you get paid by the hour, you're thinking to yourself, well, I'm counting the minutes till I go home. When I punch in is important. When I punch out is important. You know, when I start work is important. When I finish work is important. Overtime starts after 8 hours. I want to make sure I get paid overtime. Time is money, right? Think about it this way too. Even if you're not an hourly employee, maybe you're a salary employee, right? When you come to work and when you leave work determines a lot of degree how much you're actually getting paid per hour, even if you're salary. Well, also lunches, breaks, all these other things that come into play. The driving time from your time your house to your work, right? All these things are represented in the clock, and all that adds up to something that we reference as the ability to make and earn money, right? Time is money. So if you think about it that way, right, it stands for so much more than just the days and minutes and weeks. It stands for something else that's very, very important to us. Think of it this way too. A clock can stand for authority. If you're in a classroom, you can, when your class starts at a certain time and it ends at a certain time, it's unpolite, and maybe you even get in a little bit of trouble, right, if you stand up before class is over and you try to get up and leave, right? So in this case, the teacher in this classroom has authority over you. He can order you around, or she can order you around from the time class starts to the time class ends. After that, it ends, right? Once you walk out that door and class is over, they really don't have any say in what you do. So think about it that way. Time is authority, right? It's represented in the clock as well. Just like at your work, right? Your boss can tell you what to do when you're working. When you're off the clock, he cannot, right? Same thing. There's authority there, right? So there's so many other things in the clock as well. And when you think about it on a deeper level, right? And that's what I want you to do for this discussion board. So to recap, the signifier is the physical object. What's being signified is the idea, the value, etc. associated with it. Beyond just the superficial, the obvious thing, although that's important as well. And I'll give you 2 more examples, and then we'll call it quits, because I think this will help you a lot. There's a flag behind me, okay? All of you guys are going to recognize that as an American flag. I would hope so. God, I hope so, right? Because otherwise it means you repeat 2nd grade if you don't know what that means, right? But there's a configuration to this flag that is meaningful, which communicates to you and tells you this is an American flag, which is the physical representation, the way it's laid out, right? The red and white stripes, the blue background with the white stars, right? All those things communicate to you as an observer that this is an American flag, right? It's not the Mexican flag, it's not the Canadian flag, it's not the flag of Zimbabwe or the Congo, right? It's not the flag of Samoa, right? No, American small? Oh, maybe it is. But nonetheless, right? It's the American flag, and that's what's being represented here in this context, in this way, in this format. But it's deeper than that. Because if you think about it, you say, well, what does the American flag stand for? Well, the first assumption might be, well, it stands for geography, right? The geographic representation of the United States. That's what it is. That's what it means. That's what it stands for. The idea of America as a continent, as a country, the geographic boundaries. Well, yes, it does. Obviously, it represents that. But it's so much more than that. And this is something you probably learned a long time ago when you were a kid, right? First and second grade again, right? You learned what the stars stand for, what the stripes stand for, and all those sorts of things. But you also probably learned some ideas and some values that are associated with the American flag that you now, again, take for granted. You probably don't consider on an everyday level, but even though you see the flag all the time, but there's certain things that you're told that we have to associate with that. Freedom, liberty, equality, justice, right? Might be some of those things, and there's probably a whole bunch more as well. Now, that may or may not be true, right? Let's be honest with ourselves. There's a whole lot of injustice and inequality in the United States. So that may or may not be true, but that's the values that are associated with that particular representation, that particular flag in that way. And it doesn't matter if it's right or wrong, good or bad. That's what you've been told, okay? That's what you've learned. That's what I learned. That's what everybody learns. What my kids are going to learn when they go to school, and they're going to learn these same sorts of things. It's what your parents know and your grandparents know and all those sorts of things, right? So that's another interpretation of the flag, is it stands for these very important ideas and values. It's not just a piece of cloth. It's so much more than that, right? So it's not just the geography. It's so much more than that. Think about it this way. If somebody in the classroom that you were in were to reach up and grab that flag and rip it off the pole and put it on the ground and stomp on it, how would that make you feel? Now, you might think about it, and this is probably something, again, you've never considered. You think to yourself, geez, why would that make me mad? But it would probably make you mad, wouldn't it? At the very least, you might be disgusted. At the very least, you might be irritated, right? Why would somebody do that? It stands for something, right? Whether you adhere to those values or not, or you believe it, either way, you're going to look at that and say, well, that's just not right. Because you buy into it. You've been told what it means, and you see that in there whenever you look at it. And that's important to understanding how signs work, okay? So again, right or wrong, good or bad, American foreign policy doesn't matter here. It's just what you've been told. And that's very important to understanding how we interpret signs. Most of the time, it's based on what we've been told, how we've been taught, the cultural and social lens that we look through, that our experiences and our understanding of the world help us understand and interpret signs, which means that people can interpret signs differently. Somebody that doesn't live in the United States will not look at that and see freedom, justice, and equality and liberty because they were never taught that. They might see entirely other different things, or they might have no interpretation of it at all because they've never encountered it. Think of it this way. How many of you can actually tell me what the flag of, say, Kazakhstan looks like? And what are the values of the flags of Kazakhstan? What's embodied in that flag based on its configuration? You probably don't know. I don't know. I just made that up. Kazakhstan, I don't know. I can find Kazakhstan on the map, but I sure as hell can't tell you what its flag looks like, right? But that's the point. If you lived in Kazakhstan, they would have taught you that when you went through school, and you would have learned certain things about that configuration. Again, you would interpret the sign that way. So I'm hoping that makes sense. But again, one more example, and then we'll be done. Because again, I'm going to ask you to find 3 examples of signs that you encounter on your everyday, on an everyday basis, and interpret them. So please pay attention. But the signifier in this case is the flag in that context, represented that way, red and white stripes, blue and white stars. That's being signified are different values, right? Freedom, liberty, equality, etc. One more example. If you guys can see here, there's a recycling bin in here, right? I think every college classroom has one. I know at the community college are much smaller than this, but there's a configuration to this that says this is recycling. Because if you look at the one next to it, right, obviously that one's for trash, okay? So how do we know that that particular one is for recycling? Well, the color tells us something, right? The blue suggests to us that, hey, this is recycling. I've always said to myself, why isn't it green? That would make more sense. But again, I didn't make that decision, right? But I know if I see a blue trash can somewhere in just about any setting, then it means it's a recycling bin. I see them out in public all the time. I see them at parks. I see them at public places. And they don't have to have the little arrow signifier insignia on it for me to know and understand that means recycling. Just as if I saw a green trash can, I would probably associate that with recycling as well, environmentalism. So again, that's the superficial interpretation. You have a blue trash can, which is the signifier, right, with the arrows on the front. It signifies recycling. That's what's being signified, okay? What else could it stand for? Well, it could stand for money. Because when places like this accumulate certain recyclable goods, papers and metals and plastics, they send them to a place to have them recycled. And typically, and I know this because I worked at a grocery store for a long time, they used to recycle all the cardboard, they're paid for that. They make money off of that, right? So this may be something that you could associate with this, is it may be money, right? It may be a way for them to make some money off of accumulating your recyclable goods and then selling those back to whatever companies actually produce other products out of those things. So that might be something else. So the signifier, again, would be the trash can. What's being signified in this case might be a money-making opportunity. What else might be signified by this trash can? Well, I'm thinking that there might be some sort of value that the college is trying to communicate to you that they adhere to. They want you to believe that they stand for something else. And that may or may not be true, right? Just like with the flag. They may or may not care about the environment, but they're sure trying to convince you of that, aren't they? They recognize that the values of the generation now that attends schools, for the most part, cares about those sorts of things. So they're putting these into classrooms because they want to communicate to you as a student that we share your values. Protect the environment, save the planet, however you want to characterize that. I don't know what your personal feelings on that are. And it's irrelevant because the sign can be interpreted this way because you know and recognize and understand that those are legitimate things out there that people do and believe in. And you can also see that that would make sense that a college that wants you to go there and wants you to spend their money there and wants you to attend classes there and wants you to be successful there is going to try to align their values with yours and the other people that you go to school with. That would make sense. Your generation, if you want to think of it that way. So it can mean that as well. So there's a number of different things, right? So again, you have the signifier, which is the blue trash can, signifies recycling, and it signifies perhaps money, and it signifies perhaps environmental awareness, or at least an awareness of the values of the people that are going to encounter this on a daily basis. And that's what they're trying to portray. They're trying to suggest to you that they see it, they get it, they understand it. So it could be all those different things. Now, I'm hoping this makes sense. And if you're feeling at all confused, right, I'll have a little diagram associated with the discussion board that you can look at as well that'll show you signifier. It's actually very, very simple. I think that if you start thinking about some of the signs you encounter and you start interpreting those, trying to figure out it stands for this, but what else might it stand for? You're going to see that it's really not that hard to do. Another example, if I was dressed up, I would tell you, is in a classroom, what is a tie? If I was wearing a necktie as the instructor, what does that signify? And most people would say authority, knowledge, expertise. And you'd be right. It can mean all those things. It can mean none of those things. It can mean some of those things. So again, that's your cultural lens. So that might be something you're thinking about, right? What is a street sign? What is that? Any other street signs that you encounter? What about a stoplight? What about signs at home? And again, it doesn't have to be an actual sign that says exit or start or stop or anything like that. It can be just any particular object that can have a meaning associated that's not necessarily immediately apparent in that object. Okay? What does a computer signify? What does a cell phone signify? Think about these things. A cell phone signifies so much more than just the ability to make a phone call. It's communication, it's contact. I don't want to run it all down because I want you to think of the examples, but it's all those things and more, okay? So think about that, right? What do those things mean? Think about certain colors. Certain colors you come into contact, right? The red stop sign means something. The blue trash can means something. What other colors do you encounter associated with objects that give it a certain significance or means a certain meaning that can be decoded, right? These are the things I want you to think about, okay? So watch this video as many times as you have to get a sense of this and wrap your mind around it. And you might maybe even refer to your textbook, and there might be some information there that'll help you make sense of it. Please email me if you have any confusion. I'll try to help you work through this. We can chat, or we can try to figure out how to make this work, or how to come up with some things. But again, don't kill yourself. Don't spend sleepless nights worrying about this. Do the best you can. You're budding sociologists here. You're learning this, so I want you to recognize that it's not necessarily right or wrong. It's better or worse, and the way you explain it means a lot as well. You can write this out, or you can post a video just like I did here and show me the objects and talk about them just like I did. Either way works for me, okay? Just be exhausting in your explanations. What is the signifier? What is the signified? What does it mean? What could it possibly mean? And how do you know that? Those are the things I really want you to focus on. So please, get this done as soon as you can. Start thinking about these things. If you have any questions or comments, please let me know. I will talk to you again soon with another video lecture.